They laughed at her gift. But they didn't know that inside was a family heirloom worth hundreds of thousands. An elderly woman brought a modest, handmade gift to her granddaughter for her birthday. Everyone laughed, mocked her in front of the entire living room. But no one knew there was something priceless hidden inside. Her family's legacy, and a ring worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Subscribe to the channel and be sure to share the video with your friends. Click the bell so you don't miss new videos. Write in the comments, what would you do in her place? There are mornings when the silence in this house feels almost holy, like a quiet chapel before the sun breaks through stained glass. Today wasn't one of those mornings. The silence was thick with unease, like it knew something I didn't want to admit. I stood at the kitchen window holding my chipped porcelain mug, watching two sparrows quarrel over crumbs on the frost-covered porch. The same porch that used to echo with footsteps. Tiny, fast ones, sometimes heavy ones with work boots, sometimes bare feet chasing the dog. Now, just sparrows. It was Emma's 18th birthday, my granddaughter. I hadn't seen her in over 6 months, save for blurry glimpses in pictures my daughter sent in group texts that I never replied to. Not out of bitterness, no. I just never knew what to say anymore. The words that came to me always felt too old, too irrelevant. They seemed to belong to someone whose time had passed, someone politely tolerated rather than truly heard. Yesterday, my daughter Meredith had called. She rarely did. "Mum, we're doing a party for Emma. Just a small thing. You should come. I know she'd like that." She said it like she was reading a script. I could hear the clatter of dishes in the background, voices muffled by distance. She didn't ask how I was, didn't ask if I needed help getting there, just assumed I'd appear, like a scheduled program on a television no one really watches anymore. But I agreed. Of course I did. She was my granddaughter. She had my eyes once, hazel and sharp, before they faded behind screens and ring lights and whatever else these girls surrounded themselves with now. She had once gripped my hand so tightly when I took her to the library that my knuckles turned white. She loved stories then. She loved me, I think. I walked over to the antique dresser in my bedroom. It still smelled faintly of lavender oil and cedar, despite the decades. The second drawer down held the velvet box. I hadn't opened it in nearly 15 years. My fingers trembled, not because I was nervous, but because my joints weren't what they used to be. Still, the latch clicked softly, as it always had, like a secret being let out into the room. Inside, cushioned by a folded silk cloth, was the pendant. Gold, though tarnished now, shaped like a teardrop. Inlaid with a tiny sapphire, clouded by time but still catching light in the right angle. It had been my mother's, and before that, her mother's. I had worn it on my wedding day. I had clutched it in hospital corridors, whispered prayers into it during storms, and kissed it when I thought I was losing everything. It wasn't just jewelry. It was a witness. When Meredith was young, she never showed much interest in it. She preferred bracelets from catalogues, shiny things from department stores. I had hoped, maybe foolishly, that Emma would be different, that the pulse of something older might stir in her. I sat down at my writing desk, the one cluttered with bills and unopened mail, and drew out a small square of cream-coloured cardstock. With my best handwriting, careful, looping cursive I'd learned in 1958, I wrote, "For Emma, may it protect you as it protected the women before you. Love, Grandma." I placed the note gently into the box, tucked beside the pendant. I wrapped it in plain craft paper and tied it with a soft cream ribbon. No glitter, no stickers. Just honesty, just legacy. The dress I chose for the evening was a navy blue wool blend, one I wore rarely but loved dearly. It had a slight shimmer when caught in the right light, enough to feel dressed without trying too hard. I added my old pearl earrings, not real but sentimental, and dabbed my wrists with a lavender perfume that reminded me of the garden I used to tend before my knees gave out. In the mirror, I looked like someone out of place in the world they were entering, but I was determined not to let that stop me. As I waited for the taxi, I glanced at the photo frame on the hallway table. My husband, Robert, in his army uniform, smiling like he knew secrets about the world. He had given me the pendant the night before we left for deployment, slipping it into my hand without a word. I was only 22. I clutched it every night he was away. When he passed, I kept it close. Not because I believed it was magical, but because grief is like a language no one else speaks, and the pendant listened. The taxi pulled into the driveway with a crunch of gravel. I placed the gift box gently in my bag, zipped it closed, and stepped into the cold air. My hands, even with gloves, felt the bite of winter. The ride was quiet. The driver didn't make small talk, which I was thankful for. As we drove past familiar streets now filled with unfamiliar buildings, I realized how much had changed. The butcher shop was now a vape store. The corner cafe where I met Robert was a frozen yogurt chain. The past doesn't vanish. It gets paved over, lit with LED signs. Meredith's house loomed at the end of a cul-de-sac, all white siding and wide glass. It looked like it belonged in a magazine. I stared at it a moment before walking to the door, my breath clouding before me. I pressed the bell. It chimed musically, not like the solid brass knocker we used to have. Inside, voices, laughter, music. The door opened. And just like that, I stepped back into a world that wasn't mine anymore. But I was there. I was present. And in my bag, wrapped in quiet dignity, was a piece of my heart, a gift, a story, a bridge, even if they didn't see it yet. I don't know what I expected, but the moment the door opened, I knew I'd imagined it better than it would be. The warmth of the house rushed over me like an artificial breeze, scented with a perfume I didn't recognize, sweet, modern, too clean. Inside was a whirl of lights, voices, and motion. People moving in and out of the hallway, holding drinks in glinting glasses, phones in their hands like second limbs. Meredith greeted me with a distracted hug, her arms barely brushing my shoulders, before she turned her head and called out something to someone else. I hadn't even set down my purse when she stepped away. I was left standing there, my coat still on, gift held neatly in both hands like a relic. "Grandma," I heard Emma's voice in the distance, filtered through pop music. When she appeared, it took me a moment to recognize her. She had grown so tall, her frame slender and sharp, wrapped in something glittering and short. Her hair, once brown like her mother's, was now dyed silver at the ends, curled and sprayed into place. Her face was framed with makeup, her lips glossy, her lashes long and heavy. She hugged me quickly, a peck on the cheek. Her smile looked more like something posed than felt. "I'm so glad you came," she said, and then was gone again. They were all gone again. I was ushered into the living room by some man I didn't recognize, maybe a friend of Meredith's or a co-worker. He smiled and offered to take my coat before disappearing himself. The living room had been rearranged, all the furniture pushed to the edges to make space in the center, which now served as a kind of social arena. Teens lounged on beanbags or the floor. Adults stood in clusters near the kitchen island. Music bounced from hidden speakers in the ceiling. I found a small armchair near a corner and lowered myself into it slowly, aware of my knees and the sound my hips made. I placed the gift on my lap and folded my hands over it. They called this a small gathering. There must have been 40 people in the house. Some dressed like they were going to a nightclub, others like they'd wandered in from yoga. I watched as people clinked glasses, laughed too loudly, and pointed at their phones. A girl nearby took a selfie, then another with a different angle. Then again. I felt invisible. No one offered me tea. No one asked if I needed anything. I tried not to let it sting, but it did. It always did. From my little corner, I watched the show. A boy showed off sneakers that cost more than my grocery bill. Someone presented Emma with a gift wrapped in holographic paper. She squealed and hugged him. There were gasps and claps when she opened a box containing the latest iPhone. A chorus of "Whoa!" followed a high-end handbag reveal. Cameras clicked. Stories were posted. Everything was immediate, documented, and discarded. I looked at my modestly wrapped box. Craft paper. Ribbon tied by hand. No shine. No plastic. I began to question whether I'd made a mistake. Maybe I should have brought a gift card. That's what Meredith would have done. Something safe, impersonal, unmemorable. Emma started opening gifts formally now, standing in the middle of the room. Meredith announced each one in a clear voice, pausing for photos. It felt like a performance, each gift its own act. There were expensive makeup kits, a gold bracelet from someone named Skylar, limited edition sneakers, a smartwatch. Then my gift was handed to her. Meredith read my name like it didn't quite belong. Emma hesitated before unwrapping it. The room quieted just enough for me to hear the soft rustle of the ribbon. She opened the lid, lifted the note, didn't read it aloud. Then she picked up the pendant. "What is it?" someone asked. Emma held it up, letting the small sapphire catch the overhead light. "It's old," she said with a hesitant smile. A ripple of laughter passed through the teens. Someone muttered, "Is it from an antique store?" Another said, "Looks like something from a history project." Meredith gently took the box and placed it behind some of the larger packages, murmuring something I didn't catch. She didn't meet my eyes. No one clapped. No one thanked me. I felt heat rise in my chest, though the room was cold with winter light. I pressed my hands together tightly in my lap. I watched as my gift, something imbued with generations of memory, was passed over like an oddity. I don't remember much of what happened next. The noise returned to full volume. Conversations resumed. Emma moved on to the next gift, brightly wrapped and sparkly, and smiled wider than before. Someone turned the music up again. I sat in my chair and tried to breathe. A man with an undercut and a blazer brought me a slice of cake eventually, handed to me on a paper plate with a napkin. "Vanilla," he said with a wink, and walked away. I nodded, but didn't touch it. Later, I used the excuse of a headache and a cold night to slip away. Meredith gave me a brisk hug again. Emma waved from across the room. No one offered to walk me out. The box with the pendant had been placed on a side table, surrounded by gift bags that glowed with neon tissue paper. I didn't ask for it back. I left it there. I stood on the porch a moment longer than I needed to. The night had settled in, crisp and windless. I could hear the music still playing behind the closed door, muffled now like a world I had no access to. The taxi headlights broke the quiet when it pulled up. I climbed in. I didn't cry, not in front of the driver, not on the road home. But something inside me, that last flicker of hope that maybe they still valued who I was, curled up into itself and dimmed. They didn't see me. They didn't see what I gave them. But maybe they would. One day. Maybe. The house greeted me with the same stillness it always did, but that night it felt heavier, like it had absorbed the weight I carried home. The wind rattled a loose shutter outside as I closed the door behind me, and the click of the lock echoed like a bell in an empty church. I stood there for a long moment, holding onto the doorknob, as if releasing it would also release the sting tightening in my chest. I didn't take off my coat right away. Instead, I walked slowly through the hallway, letting the dark swallow me. The light from the street lamp outside pooled across the living room floor in a perfect square. Dust particles danced in the beam like tiny ghosts. I used to sweep that floor every other day, not because it needed it, but because it gave me something to do, something to fix, to control, to complete. Tonight, there was no comfort in routines. I sat at the kitchen table, still in my coat, and stared at the bowl of apples I had placed there 3 days ago. One was beginning to shrivel near the stem. The ticking of the wall clock filled the room like static. I wondered if the gift was still sitting on that side table, buried under glossy boxes and glittered ribbon. I could see it clearly in my mind. Plain brown paper tied with cream-coloured ribbon. A note written in my best handwriting. Unread, unacknowledged, discarded. I reached into the drawer next to me and pulled out the letter. It was creased, the paper thin from years of folding and unfolding. Robert had written it the night before he left for his second deployment. He gave it to me with trembling hands, tucked beneath the pendant that now lay in my granddaughter's careless possession. In the letter, he wrote about courage, not the kind found on the battlefield, but the quiet courage it takes to keep a family alive through love. He wrote about his grandmother, who had worn the pendant through 2 world wars, and about his mother, who wore it while raising 6 children through poverty. "This is not jewelry," he had written in bold, slanted script. "It is memory. It is protection. It is yours, until you find the one who will honor it next." I had found her, or at least I thought I had. But what do they know of such things now? My children, my grandchildren. They live in a world where the value of something lies in its price tag and whether it photographs well for social media. The idea of an heirloom, of something old and meaningful, is lost among their wireless chargers and disposable trends. I ran my fingers over the edge of the letter and let the tears come, quietly. Not the kind that explode, but the kind that slip out when the body is too tired to hold them anymore. They traced the lines of my face and fell to the table, staining the wood dark. It wasn't about the pendant. It never really was. It was about being seen, being remembered, being honored for the life I've lived, not hidden away like some relic of a time best forgotten. I rose from the table, wiping my face with my sleeve, and walked to the cabinet in the hallway where I kept the old photo albums, each one thick with plastic sleeves and handwritten labels. I took one down and brought it to the living room, placing it on the coffee table before sitting on the edge of the couch. Inside the album, stories waited. Photographs of Robert in uniform, of my mother in her wedding dress, of my children on Christmas morning, covered in bows and chocolate stains. There was a photo of me holding Emma the day she was born, my arms younger then, my face fuller, my smile unguarded. She had been so small, her fingers wrapped around mine like vines around a branch. I thought about how I had sung her lullabies, how I had once held her through a fever while Meredith cried in the kitchen. I remembered buying her first set of paints, the way she had drawn me as a superhero grandma in crayon and stuck it to the fridge. I still had that drawing somewhere. Those memories felt sacred. But tonight, they also felt like they belonged to someone else. I closed the album, suddenly too tired to turn another page. Sleep came late, after hours of sitting in silence, staring at the flickering television screen that I never turned on. When I finally went to bed, I didn't bother changing clothes. I lay under the quilt, listening to the distant sound of a dog barking down the street, and wondered how many more evenings would feel this way. The next morning came slowly. Grey light bled through the curtains. I didn't make tea. I didn't brush my hair. I simply moved through the house like a shadow, my hands moving from surface to surface, tracing a map that no longer led anywhere. It was only after noon that I opened the drawer again, pulled out the small wooden box hidden beneath old tax records and misplaced receipts. It was something I had hidden for decades. A letter from a jeweler in 1963, a valuation document, a newspaper clipping of a robbery where a similar pendant had been stolen from a historical museum. It had been estimated at a six-figure value even then. I had never thought of it that way. To me, it had been worth something far greater: trust, love, continuity. But now I needed to see it through their eyes, to speak in the only language they understood. I smoothed the documents out on the table, the jeweler's note, the certificate, the photo. Then I folded them neatly and placed them in a small file folder. My hands were steady now. If they could not see value in history, I would show them its worth in currency. The pendant wasn't lost yet, not truly, but I had lost something far more difficult to replace, and that wound would take more than money to mend. That evening I called a taxi. I had an appointment with the past, and perhaps in doing so, I would find a way to buy myself a little dignity back. The cab driver didn't ask questions. He only glanced at me through the rear-view mirror once, a curious flick of his eyes, and then returned to the quiet rhythm of the road. That suited me just fine. The documents rested in my lap, folded with precision into a brown leather folder I'd kept since Robert first returned home from the war. It had once held letters, bills, the deed to our first home. Today it held something else, a reckoning. We drove through streets I hadn't visited in years. Old storefronts were replaced by sterile glass boutiques, cafes with foreign names, yoga studios where bakeries once stood. The city had been rearranged while I blinked. It no longer looked like the place where I raised a family. It looked like someone else's dream. When the taxi pulled up in front of the jeweler's, I hesitated. The shop's exterior was modern, elegant, with bronze-trimmed windows and white marble steps. It wasn't the kind of place I ever thought I'd walk into. For most of my life, I'd thought places like this weren't meant for women like me. Women who bought one good coat and wore it for 20 winters, who never bought new shoes unless the old ones had holes. But today, I walked up the steps slowly, each one deliberate, as if I were crossing into a different life. The interior was quiet, lit with warm golden lighting that made everything look more expensive. There were no ringing phones, no chimes, just silence, broken only by the click of my shoes against the polished tile. A young man in a dark suit greeted me at the counter. His smile was polite, but rehearsed. "I'd like to have something appraised," I said, lifting the folder and placing it on the glass. His eyebrows raised slightly when he opened it. He read quickly, his fingers moving with practiced ease. Then he paused at the photo of the pendant. "This is exceptional," he murmured, almost forgetting I was still there. He asked if I had the piece with me. I pulled it out from my coat pocket, wrapped still in the silk it had rested in for decades. The room felt colder when I placed it on the counter. I watched him unwrap it, careful and reverent now. His eyes widened. Another man was called over, older, with a scholar's posture and glasses perched low on his nose. Together they examined it with tools and lamps, their murmurs barely audible. I didn't interrupt. I knew what they'd find. Eventually the elder one looked up. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "It's been in my family for over a century," I replied, "passed from mother to daughter." He nodded slowly. This design is incredibly rare. Mid-19th century, hand-forged, French origin. The sapphire is untreated. That alone places it in a very exclusive category. I listened without reaction. They offered to prepare a formal valuation document. The market value for insurance purposes, the younger one said, would be in the range of $300,000 to $400,000, possibly more, depending on the auction and provenance. The words drifted through the air, suspended like dust motes. I nodded once. "Can it be sold?" I asked. The older man smiled, respectful now. "Yes. We have a list of clients who would be very interested. We could broker it for you discreetly." I left the pendant with them under agreement, their security systems already engaged. A signature here, an initial there. I had never signed anything worth so much before. My hands didn't shake. Outside, the air felt thinner. I sat on a bench across the street and watched as people bustled by, heads down, bags clutched, voices quick and distracted. No one noticed the old woman sitting alone. That was fine. I felt oddly calm. Not triumphant, this wasn't about winning, but something else. Resolute, perhaps. For years, I had clung to the pendant as the last physical tie to the women who came before me. It had meant safety, continuity, a compass in hard times. But if my daughter and granddaughter could not honor it, could not understand its soul, then maybe it had one last purpose to serve. Later that night, at home, I poured myself a glass of the sherry I kept for holidays and sat by the fireplace. The room glowed in amber tones, quiet and steady. I thought of Robert. I thought of my mother. I whispered into the air, as if they might hear me. I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing this for clarity. I spent the next 2 days sorting through paperwork. I called the realtor. I made arrangements. I began clearing drawers, not the sentimental ones, but the ones filled with detritus, broken pens, expired coupons, menus from restaurants that no longer existed. I was preparing for something. I didn't know exactly what yet, but I knew one thing with certainty. I had been invisible to them, irrelevant. An old woman in the corner with strange gifts and outdated manners. That was about to change. Not because I wanted their approval, but because they needed to remember what strength looked like, even if it came wrapped in brown paper and a simple ribbon. The call came just 3 days later. I was in the garden, what was left of it, pulling weeds from between the stepping stones, pretending it was still spring, even though winter's breath still lingered in the air. The phone in my cardigan pocket vibrated twice. I stood, wiped my hands on a towel, and answered. It was the jeweler. The pendant had sold. For more than they anticipated. I don't know what I expected to feel. Relief, perhaps. Sadness. But what I felt was stillness. A cool and quiet awareness, like the moment before a summer storm. The sale was confirmed. The funds would be wired. They said I could come by any time for the papers. I thanked them, hung up, went inside. I stared at my reflection in the hallway mirror for a long time. The face that looked back at me wasn't triumphant or bitter, just calm. There were new lines around the eyes, lines that hadn't been there before that party. Or maybe I simply hadn't looked closely enough in years. I took a deep breath and began packing. Not everything, just what I needed. Important papers, my late husband's medals, a few photo albums, the hand-stitched quilt from my mother. The rest, furniture, books, kitchenware, I left for the estate agent. I arranged for the house to be listed immediately, and within a week, the for sale sign stood at the edge of the lawn. Meredith didn't know. Emma didn't either. Not yet. But they would. It was the week after Easter that I returned to their home, unannounced. I dressed carefully, choosing the same navy blue dress I had worn to the birthday party, a quiet nod to the moment they had chosen to forget. This time, I brought no gift in my hands, only my voice and the weight of my decision. When Meredith opened the door, her smile was automatic, polite. "Mum? What a surprise." I nodded. "Can we talk?" She stepped aside, uncertain. Emma was on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up briefly, then turned away. I didn't sit. I remained standing, in the middle of the room, where just weeks earlier I had been the quiet shadow. "I won't take much of your time," I said. "I just wanted to give you both an update. About the pendant." Meredith frowned. "The necklace?" "Yes," I replied. I explained everything, how I had taken it to a jeweler, how it was appraised, authenticated, and sold. Their eyes widened in unison. Emma straightened. Meredith's mouth parted, speechless. "It belonged to our family for generations," I continued. "Its value was never just in gold or sapphire. It was in history, memory. But you didn't want that, so I turned it into something you do value." Meredith finally found her voice. "Wait, you sold it?" I nodded. "For nearly $500,000. Emma gasped. "What?" The silence that followed wasn't like the one after a storm. It was the one before lightning strikes. Tense, dry, heavy. "I sold the pendant," I said again, gently. "And I've sold the house too." Meredith's face went pale. "Your house? Why?" "Because I'm starting over. Somewhere smaller. Simpler. And I thought you both should know." Emma looked stunned, as though trying to reconcile the version of me she had constructed in her mind with the one standing before her. The grandmother who baked pies and wore cardigans was suddenly a woman who wielded power without raising her voice. "I'm not angry," I added. "I just want you to understand that there is value in what you can't see right away, that not every treasure comes wrapped in glitter." I turned to go. Emma stood. "Wait, Grandma, why didn't you tell us sooner?" I paused at the door. "Because you weren't listening then. Maybe you are now." And then I left. The cab was waiting outside. As it pulled away, I looked back once. Meredith and Emma stood in the doorway, small and uncertain. The house behind them was beautiful, expensive, hollow. They hadn't just lost a pendant. They had lost something much harder to replace. But maybe, just maybe, they had gained something too. A reason to look inward, to remember, to change. The wind shifted as we turned the corner, carrying away what was left of the silence between us. For the first time in a long time, I felt weightless. The envelope sat on my desk for nearly 2 days before I sealed it. A simple, cream-coloured envelope, nothing fancy. No monogram, no wax seal, no frills. Just my handwriting, steady and slow, addressed to Emma. There was so much I wanted to say, so many things I had swallowed over the years, thinking they would go down easier if I didn't name them. But I had learned, finally, that unspoken truths fester. They rot. And sometimes they take love with them. I placed the letter in the envelope, and with it, a copy of the pendant's certificate and the jeweller's appraisal note. Not to show off. Not to gloat. But because I wanted her to understand that the world had recognized something she hadn't. That history has value, even when its edges are worn. I mailed the letter without ceremony, slipping it into the slot at the corner post office where I used to send holiday cards. My hand lingered for a moment as I let it go. Then I turned and walked home. No expectations, no regrets. A week passed. I spent most of it in my new apartment, a smaller space, cleaner lines, fewer corners for memories to hide in. The building was quiet. I liked it that way. I took long walks around the neighborhood, got to know the shopkeepers. I even joined a book club at the library down the street. No one there knew me as Emma's grandma or Meredith's mother. I was just Evelyn, a woman who brought lemon cookies and had opinions about mysteries. It felt like breathing after holding my breath for years. Then, one afternoon, the phone rang. It was Emma. Her voice was soft, hesitant. "Hi, Grandma." I sat down. "I got your letter," she said. "I didn't know. I mean, I didn't realize it was worth that much." I told her it wasn't about the money. There was a long pause. "I found the note," she added. "The one you put in the box with the pendant. I didn't read it before. I was distracted." I didn't say anything. I let her speak. "I'm sorry I didn't understand. That night, I was just excited, and everyone was watching. I didn't want to seem weird." That made me smile, though she couldn't see it. "It wasn't weird," I said. "It was different, and sometimes different makes people uncomfortable. But that doesn't mean it isn't valuable." She was quiet again. I could hear the sound of her breathing, shaky. "I showed Mum," she said. "The letter, the photos." She didn't say much, just sat there holding it for a long time. I nodded to myself. That sounded like Meredith. "I've been thinking," Emma continued, "about family, about legacy. I didn't know that pendant had been passed down so far. It's like a story no one told me." "They tried," I said gently. "You just weren't ready to hear it yet." "I want to now." Something shifted in my chest, subtle but distinct, like ice melting. "I'm coming to visit," she added quickly. "If that's okay, just me." A beat passed. "I'd like that very much," I said. We talked for a few more minutes, nothing profound. She told me about school, about a paper she was writing. She asked if I still made blueberry pie the same way. I told her yes, but I use less sugar now. We laughed, lightly, like people trying to remember the steps to an old dance. After she hung up, I sat still for a long time, the silence in the apartment now warm instead of empty. Later that evening, I opened the drawer where I kept Robert's letters. I pulled out one from 1972, written in Germany while he was stationed near Munich. In it, he wrote about how people carry history in their bones, whether they want to or not. That some stories skip a generation, only to return stronger in the next. He had written, "When they're ready, they'll come looking for you. All you need to do is stay open." I folded the letter back into its envelope and smiled. She was looking now, and I was still open. Emma arrived on a rainy Saturday afternoon. I met her at the front of the building, an umbrella in one hand and a wrapped pie in the other. She was soaked to the knees and out of breath from running the last block, but when she saw me, she smiled. A real, unguarded smile that reached her eyes. We hugged. It was awkward for a second, then warm. She held me tighter than I expected, as though afraid I might vanish if she let go. Inside, we dried off and sat at the small round table in my kitchen. The pie sat between us, untouched. Neither of us reached for it right away. We just talked. Slowly at first. Cautiously. But soon the words flowed like they used to when she was a little girl curled beside me in bed, asking about stars and dreams. She asked about the pendant, not its worth, but its story. So I told her. I told her about my great-grandmother, who wore it sewn inside the lining of her coat as she fled from France during the war. About my grandmother, who wore it at her wedding and later buried it in the backyard during the Depression, afraid of thieves. About my mother, who wore it to every church service, every funeral, every time she needed to feel strong, and then about me. She listened, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, like a child hearing a fairy tale for the first time. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "It's like it belonged to all of you," she whispered. It still does, I said, even if it's not here anymore. She looked down at her hands. I didn't deserve it. I shook my head gently. You weren't ready. That's different. She nodded slowly. But I want to be now. I want to learn. We spent the rest of the weekend together. We went through photo albums, newspaper clippings, letters yellowed with time. I showed her the old recipes, handwritten on index cards, the ones she used to bake with me as a child. We talked about Robert, about Meredith, about choices and regrets, and the delicate thread that binds generations together even when the stitches fray. Emma stayed 2 nights. She helped me organize the bookshelf, and on Sunday, she offered to drive me to the library, insisting we pick out a mystery novel to read together. We laughed over coffee, walked the neighborhood arm in arm, and I taught her how to tell when a pie crust is done just by the smell. Before she left, she asked if she could have one thing. I expected her to name a piece of jewelry, a photo, a keepsake. Instead, she pointed to a faded envelope taped inside one of my recipe books. It was the drawing she had made as a child. Me. With a cape, labelled Super Grandma. You kept this? She asked, eyes misting. Of course, I said. It was one of the first times I ever felt truly seen. She smiled. Can I keep it for a while? I want to frame it. I nodded, and she took it gently as if it might crumble in her hands. As I watched her leave that day, umbrella open against the drizzle, I didn't feel the usual ache that follows goodbyes. I felt light, buoyant, as though something once broken had been gently stitched back together. That night, I sat by the window and wrote a new letter. Not to Emma, not to Meredith, just to myself. I wrote about what it meant to pass things on, not just objects, but values, stories, strength. I wrote that sometimes the legacy isn't in what you give, but in what you teach someone to want, in what you plant that won't bloom until long after you're gone. I folded the letter and placed it in a small wooden box, not to be opened soon, just to wait. Because someday, Emma might have a daughter of her own, and maybe, when the time is right, she'll know how to give her something that can't be bought, something wrapped not in glitter, but in memory. And maybe, just maybe, she'll remember that once, a quiet old woman gave her a gift everyone laughed at, and she turned it into something no one would ever forget. If this story touched you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Check out the next story on the screen or explore our channel for more powerful moments like this one. And if you think someone else needs to hear this, share it. Thank you for watching.